Okay, eighth grade. As you can see, I'm using an app this time that allows me to put the slides on the screen. And you can still see my wonderful face, so that's great. We're just going to try this out and see if it's going to be better. I think it'll be better, um, but I'm not sure. I need to test it out a couple times before I decide if we're going to use this. So today we're going to be talking about Chapter 6, Section 3, which is the Jacksonian era, the age of Jackson. So this section, you've already read it, you've done the CYP. It's mostly about the presidency and legacy of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson is kind of a legendary figure in American history. When I say legendary, I mean because stories about him are really the stuff of legend. And in addition to being a legendary figure, he also has a very mixed legacy, right? He was one of the most popular presidents in American history, but he also has a very checkered record when it comes to things like race relations in the United States, right? He set a tone for the American government that was very discriminatory and sometimes all out hateful towards racial minorities, non-white people. So we're going to talk about Jackson's accomplishments, why he was important, and also his legacy, his impact on American political life after the time he left office. Right, so Andrew Jackson is president from 1829 to 1837. So you guys know we're starting on slide 18. Although you can see it on the screen here. So I'm just telling you in case you want to play this in the background while you take notes on a doc or something. We are on slide 18. Excuse me. So the age of Jackson is going to follow the era of good feelings. So I think a couple classes ago, we learned a little bit about the era of good feelings. This was a period of time in which American political life was dominated by the Republican Party after the War of 1812. The Federalist Party basically collapses. There's disagreement within the Republican Party about laissez-faire economics and the role of tariffs, but basically everyone has the same shared political values. Everyone is really enthusiastic about states' rights, but there's also a tremendous sense of national pride as well. People identify as Americans first and members of their individual states second, right? And it's called the era of good feelings. Well, this period only lasted for a short time in the first half of the 19th century, because when Andrew Jackson becomes president, the era of good feelings comes to an end. So, and then the era of good feelings transitions into the age of Jackson. So I said Jackson is a legendary figure in American politics. And that's because there's a lot of stories about his childhood and his young adult life, which may or may not be exaggerated. We really don't know. We do know that he grew up in a log cabin. He was extremely poor. He kind of just grew up in a log cabin in the South. When he was a child, he caught smallpox and he survived, which was very rare because smallpox was extremely dangerous, especially to children. And then by the time he was 14, he was living by himself because both of his parents were dead. And he didn't have any other relatives that were taking care of him. So from the age 14 onwards, he took care of himself. And he's living in a log cabin as a 14-year-old in the South. It was not an easy life, but that's what he did. And then as a young adult, he joins the military. He becomes a soldier, and he gets shot up a bunch of times. We're not really sure how many times, but a lot of historians say multiple times he was shot. And in fact, sometimes he was shot and his wounds appeared to be fatal, but he managed to survive each and every time he got shot. It's kind of an amazing thing to say, right? Um, every time I get shot, I survive. Right? That's Andrew Jackson's story. The soldiers he traveled with, and as he moved up in the military ranks, the soldiers he started to command would tell stories about how tough he was. This is where he gets the nickname Old Hickory, right? A hickory tree is made of very strong wood. It's like a very, very tough, hard wood. And an old hickory tree would be something that, especially in the South, you would associate with strength. He works his way up in the military. He's a complete and total self-made man. And he makes it all the way to being a general and extremely wealthy, right? So he has a kind of iconic American story of achieving greatness all on your own despite tremendous odds. So a lot of people have tremendous respect for Andrew Jackson for being able to achieve all of this in his lifetime. Andrew Jackson was known for being a big advocate of getting popular sovereignty pushed through. This is the idea that you don't have to own property to vote. He wanted millions and millions more Americans to be able to vote. Of course, he didn't want to extend the vote to women or to children, of course, and given his racial views, he didn't want to extend the vote to blacks or Native Americans either. Andrew Jackson also was known for hating or for having a lot of enemies. Right? So he makes enemies with Henry Clay. He is enemies with a lot of government officials. He does not like the Federal Reserve at all. He hates the Federal Reserve. What's really funny about that is that his face is on the $20 bill, which is, you know, he'd be spinning in his grave if he knew that were true, right? Okay, so Andrew Jackson is an extremely popular political figure before he becomes president. He's a well-known military leader in the South, and he has kind of a big national presence. And he represents the idea that anyone, or any white male that is, can and should participate in politics, whether that's running for office or voting or campaigning. Politics affects your daily life. So if you are a white male, it doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, educated, or growing up in the woods by yourself like he did, you should participate in politics. So Jackson knows that he's super popular. So in 1824, after the presidency of James Monroe, he decides to run for president against John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay, and then a third person who your book mentions, but I don't even remember his name, so you don't need to know it either. And the slides say it doesn't matter either. So Henry Clay is a big national figure. People know him over as a war hawk, as a states' rights advocate. John Quincy Adams, of course, is a former Secretary of State for President Monroe, and he's the son of John Adams, so he's a really big name in American politics. And then, of course, Andrew Jackson is sort of like the really popular guy, the popular figure on the rise. So in this election of 1824, there's all these different candidates running. There isn't a major political opponent to Andrew Jackson from another party. These are all within the Republican Party. Jackson receives the most votes. He also receives the most electoral votes, but under the Constitution, the way the Electoral College works is you are not president unless you receive a majority of electoral votes. So Jackson receives more electoral votes than John Quincy Adams, Henry Clay or anyone else running for office, but he doesn't receive a majority. Right? So Andrew Jackson is not yet president. Right? So Jackson thinks, okay, well, I'm not president, but I have the most votes. I won the popular vote. So when the House of Representatives is going to choose the president, because that's what the Constitution says, if no one has the most electoral votes, the House of Representatives is going to decide who the president is. He thinks the House of Representatives is going to pick me because I have the most votes. Well, except Henry Clay goes to the House of Representatives, and Henry Clay is a really important figure in the House of Representatives, and he says, don't vote for me, vote for John Quincy Adams, because we need to stop Andrew Jackson from becoming president. So Henry Clay basically sacrifices himself to stop Andrew Jackson from becoming president. The House of Representatives chooses John Quincy Adams because of all of Henry Clay's supporters in the House join up with John Quincy Adams supporters in the House. And now we have President John Quincy Adams, right? And so Jackson feels like he got robbed, and he has a good reason to do this. Andrew Jackson probably would have won the presidency if it wasn't for Henry Clay basically sacrificing himself and telling all of his supporters to go vote for Adams. Right? And then to make matters worse, as soon as John Quincy Adams takes the presidency, he immediately turns around and he nominates, drumroll, Henry Clay to be his Secretary of State. So obviously they made a secret deal before the House of Representatives voted, in which Henry Clay gets to be Secretary of State if John Quincy Adams becomes president. So Andrew Jackson gets really, really, really mad that he lost this election. Okay, so Jackson and his supporters accuse Adams and Clay of making this dirty deal, and he's probably right to accuse them of that, but that's politics. So John Quincy Adams is president, and Jackson's supporters are not happy, not only because of this dirty deal, but also because not very many people voted for John Quincy Adams, right? He lost the popular vote. He didn't get very many electoral college votes. And here he is, this son of a former president who was already the Secretary of State, making this secret deal with Henry Clay, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, in order to become president. So John Quincy Adams goes into the presidency being very, very unpopular with the people. And this is an obstacle that he's never able to overcome during his presidency. So let's take a quick moment to talk about the presidency of John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams wants the federal government to play a strong role in the economy, at least a stronger role than other Republicans want. He basically puts the federal government on a bunch of projects, right? He wants things like roads and bridges and museums built, and he wants the federal government to be in charge of it. But because he's so unpopular, he's not able to accomplish very much as president. Now, what's kind of sad is John Quincy Adams was a very good public speaker, and he had a deep love for America, and he wanted to make America the greatest country in the world, but he just couldn't shake the fact that he was so unpopular. So this made his presidency, in the eyes of most historians, to be a failure, right? He only serves one term. So let's see, I think we're going to stop here because I want to test out this new format. I do want to mention before we stop, though, that when Andrew Jackson runs for president in 1824, we have a reemergence of the two-party system and an ending of the era of good feelings. Right? So in the election of 1824, which is won by John Quincy Adams, The Republican Party splits into two, and we basically have Andrew Jackson